My name is Marcus Al-Rahim, and I come from the Middle East. For many years my work was simple and deadly, to hunt Christians. He says this with a steady voice, but his eyes reveal an inner war that has not yet ended, and it is impossible not to feel the weight of that sentence. Marcus was not just an intelligence officer. He was the man who knocked on the door before the prayers ended, the name that made underground churches tremble. Till one night in an isolated base, he found something forbidden, a video of Charlie Kirk talking about faith, freedom, and the God who turns persecutors into messengers. That was when his world began to collapse. And what you are about to watch today is the fall, the escape, the conversion, and the most dangerous battle I faced after finding Jesus. Before I tell you how all of this happened, just check if you are already subscribed, if you left your like, and comment your city or country. I want to know how far this story has reached. I grew up in a place where the dust never settled, where the streets always carried the constant scent of tension, and where the horizon always looked like something was about to explode. When I say that my name is Marcus Al-Rahim, and that I come from the Middle East, I am not just talking about geography. I am talking about a territory shaped by ancient disputes, strong beliefs, and a sense of vigilance that accompanies every sunrise. Since childhood, I learned to interpret silence as a threat and prayer as a possible rebellion. I often remember my mother calling me inside before the sun disappeared, not because she feared the darkness, but because of what the darkness could conceal. I grew up hearing that certain groups, and especially Christians, were infiltrators, messengers from the West, a dangerous influence that needed to be neutralized before it took root. And when you grow up hearing something like that, it becomes part of your identity, as if it were an absolute truth that should never be questioned. I became a teenager, carrying that conviction inside me, like someone carrying a mission. At 17 years old, I entered the military academy with a nearly arrogant pride, believing I was doing what my country, my family, and my history demanded of me. I remember the feeling of stepping into the academy courtyard for the first time, a sea of young people like me, all determined, all ready to be shaped, all believing that defending the nation was more important than understanding who we truly needed to become. They taught us rigor, they taught us discipline, and they taught us that hesitation was synonymous with weakness. In that environment, doubting was not allowed, and questioning beliefs was almost an act of betrayal. The trainings were long, intense, and sometimes felt inhuman. Surveillance, behavioral analysis, silent operations, everything was part of the curriculum. But what truly shaped who I became were the trainings focused on interrogations and anti-insurgency operations. I can still remember the first instructor looking at me and saying, "Marcus, your duty is to prevent dangerous ideas from spreading." And at that time, I believed wholeheartedly that Christianity was one of those ideas. To us, Christianity represented external influence, cultural infiltration, a threat. And by internalizing that, I began to become exactly the soldier they wanted. Cold, calculated, efficient, obedient, someone who did not hesitate to carry out orders. With every successful mission, my name circulated among the superiors. I gained a reputation quickly, faster than I could fully understand. I remember a colonel pulling me aside after an operation and saying, "You see the enemy before everyone else. That is a gift." That word echoed inside me for years, feeding a distorted version of purpose. From that moment on, I was assigned to even more sensitive roles, focused on locating and dismantling clandestine meetings. And that was how my main mission became tracking down house churches, secret gatherings, small Christian groups that met in silence, often hidden in basements, storage rooms, or abandoned houses. I did not see people. I saw targets. That was how I entered that operation, the operation that to this day I can relive in painfully vivid detail. We received a report that a Christian group met regularly in a house on the outskirts of the city. It was a small structure, thin walls, no front windows, located on a street where no one would question late-night movement. We were silent, fast, calculated. We moved out at the hour before dawn, when the human mind is still caught between dreams and reality, when the body's natural vigilance is at its lowest. We entered with precision and found about a dozen people sitting in a circle, holy books in their hands, eyes closed, some whispering prayers I could not fully hear, but my gaze stopped on her, Lina Abu Safi, a young nurse known for caring for poor children, working in volunteer clinics, someone anyone would call good without hesitation. I did not know her personally, but I had seen her name circulate in reports as someone who helped families in vulnerable situations. And how did that reconcile with what we were doing there? I did not allow that question to fully form inside me, because in our training, doubt was the most dangerous enemy. Lena did not resist, did not scream, did not ask for help. She simply raised her hands slowly and looked into my eyes as if she already knew who I was before I said anything. She did not seem afraid of me. And that absence of fear unsettled me in a way I was not prepared to feel. The slight hesitation I felt lasted seconds, but to me it seemed like minutes. During the interrogation, she continued with that serenity I could not understand. And in the moment when I expected her to break, to beg for mercy, to try to argue her way out, she simply said, in a calm, almost gentle tone, "I pray that you see what you are doing to us." That sentence should have passed through me like a provocation, but it did not. It stayed, stuck like the tip of an arrow that cannot be pulled out. I tried to ignore it. I tried to act with the same firmness as always, but I realized that something inside me, even if I would not admit it, had been touched. And what did I do to deal with it? I toughened up. I intensified operations. I took on more responsibilities. I became even more ruthless, as if somehow severity could silence that unease Lena had left inside me. For weeks, that phrase echoed in my subconscious. I found myself thinking about her in the middle of the night, thinking about the way she looked at me, the way she didn't fear me, the way she knew I had power over her. And yet she didn't express hatred. That absence of hatred hurt me in a way I couldn't explain. But even so, I continued. I continued because I believed it was still impossible for me to be wrong. I continued because at that time, admitting doubt would mean demolishing the identity I had built since adolescence. I continued because I didn't know how to do anything but obey and remain faithful to what I believed was my mission. It was shortly after that operation that my world began to change, without warning, without logic, without permission. I was on an isolated military base, a place where the silence was so profound that even the slamming of a door sounded like thunder. I was reviewing material seized during one of the last investigations when I found a confiscated cell phone, something common for us. Most devices were locked, out of battery, or without useful content. But that phone, that specific device, had a downloaded video, just one. And before deleting it, something I would have done automatically, the thumbnail caught my attention. It was a man I'd never seen before, speaking on a Western stage, microphone in hand. His name appeared in the file title Charlie Kirk. I didn't know who he was, I'd never heard that name. And for some reason I still can't explain, I clicked. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was irritation, maybe it was simply an automatic gesture. I don't know. But the video started, and the first sentence I heard hit me like a blow I wasn't prepared to receive. He spoke about freedom, about faith, about the courage to question oppressive systems. And I felt something inside me clench. My immediate reaction was anger. I paused the video, almost deleting it right there. Who was that man to talk about my reality? Who was he to say that persecuting religious groups was unjust? Who was he to compare historical persecutions to situations like mine? I closed my phone and put it aside. But that same night, when everyone was asleep and the silence of the base seemed even heavier than usual, I picked up the device again. I can't explain it. Maybe it was that uneasy feeling that had been haunting me since the encounter with Lena. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time in a long time, I felt curious. I watched for a few minutes and stopped. Then I watched a few more. Then I went back to the beginning. And the more I listened, the more something stirred inside me. Something I tried to stifle but couldn't. The moment that truly broke me down was when he started talking about Saul, about the persecutor of Christians who believed he was serving the law, about how blind conviction can lead a man to destroy innocence believing he is doing the right thing. When Charlie said that, I felt something impossible to describe. It was as if someone was narrating my life in detail, details I had never told anyone. I felt breathless. I felt my hands trembling. I felt something I had never felt during all my years of military training, a painful, profound, inescapable awareness. For the first time I questioned whether I was truly on the right side. For the first time I felt fear, not of the enemy, but of myself, of my actions, of my choices, of what I had become without realizing it, and that small crack that began in that silent room, on that distant base. At the moment I heard Charlie Kirk speak of a pursuer who found the truth. That small crack became the beginning of something I never imagined I would experience. And it's precisely from here that everything begins to crumble and somehow to rebuild itself, because what I heard that night wouldn't leave my mind. And the more I tried to ignore it, the louder it echoed. But this part of the story only begins to grow from here on out. I returned to the lodging that night, carrying a weight on my chest I had never felt before. I tried to convince myself it was just tiredness, maybe something I'd eaten, or just my mind playing tricks after days without rest. But deep down, I knew it wasn't any of that. The word Saul echoed inside me like a dull hammer blow. Every time I breathed, it felt like that story was speaking to me, as if someone were calling me by name without using my voice. And the more I tried to push it away, the stronger it seemed to become. At that moment, for the first time in years, I realized I was losing control of what I had always considered my fortress, my own mind. And it was because of this discomfort that I did something I would never have admitted to anyone at the time. I started watching other Charlie Kirk videos, secretly, almost like a criminal. It was ironic because for many years, my job was precisely to prevent such messages from circulating. I was the one who seized cell phones, deleted files, confiscated Christian materials. And now I was sitting in the dark, my heart pounding, as if I were committing a forbidden act while listening to the very person I was supposed to censor. The first time I searched for more videos was on impulse, almost without thinking. I opened my confiscated phone, put on makeshift headphones, the broken kind that still worked on one side, and set the screen to illuminate only half of my face. The brightness was too strong in the dark, and I covered it with my hand so that no one, not even sleeping, could notice. I watched fragments, paused, rewound, repeated. I started with irritation, immersed myself in curiosity, and always ended with that feeling that something was wrong with me, or something was finally starting to fall into place, although I couldn't admit it. As the days passed, I began to research more things, still in secret. I researched stories of persecuted Christians around the world. I began to understand the accounts of communities that lived in hiding, meetings that took place in silence to avoid reprisals. I had never stopped to think about what it meant to follow a faith that could cost so much. I had only looked and seen targets. For the first time I was seeing human beings, and that affected me in a way I wasn't ready to face. One afternoon, while reviewing items seized from a recent operation, I found something that seemed out of place, a small book with a simple worn cover hidden at the bottom of a bag. It was a New Testament. I picked it up only because I suspected it might contain notes, names, addresses, something useful for an investigation. But when I opened it, I found nothing but marked pages, some with small folds, others with passages underlined in an almost childish way. I felt uneasy, a strange sensation as if I were holding something dangerous. For a moment I thought about putting the book back, pretending I hadn't seen it. But something inside me, something I didn't recognize, made me put it in my uniform pocket, and when no one was looking, I took it with me to my quarters. That night I sat on my bed, the only dim lamp illuminating the space, and opened the book for the first time. I didn't know where to begin. The text seemed too simple, almost naive, yet at the same time laden with something I couldn't define. I read about Jesus, about forgiveness, about compassion, about loving those who hurt you, and each line seemed to contradict everything that had shaped my identity. I felt as if I were reading something forbidden, yet impossibly necessary. The words not only confronted me, they exposed me. I read slowly, as if each sentence were dangerous, as if it could change something I still insisted on protecting. The page that really broke down for me was about rest for the weary. It seemed written for me. I had never admitted that I was tired. Never. But when I read those words, I realized I was carrying burdens I had never acknowledged. And it was there, in that stuffy room with the sounds of the military camp vibrating in the distance, that I felt as if something inside me, began to break. I don't know how long I stood there, motionless, with the open book in my lap. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. I only know that in a moment I could never have imagined, I felt a strange impulse, almost impossible to resist. I wanted to speak, not as a soldier, not as an officer, not as a pursuer, but as someone who no longer knew who he was. So for the first time in my life I prayed. I didn't know the right words, I didn't know if there was a specific way to do it. I didn't know anything. I just closed my eyes, and in a voice so low it barely came out of my throat, I murmured something like, "If what I'm reading is true, show me, because I no longer know what is right." And in that instant, for the first time since childhood, I cried. Not quick, discreet tears, real tears, the kind that seemed to come from the chest, not the eyes. It was as if every wrong decision, every intrusion, every harsh word, every threat, every persecution was all accumulating inside me at once. And yet, amidst the weight, there was a strange feeling of liberation, as if a door had opened inside me. It wasn't joy, it wasn't peace, not yet. It was truth. And it's difficult to explain how much the truth weighs when you've spent years avoiding looking at it. I stood there in absolute silence, knowing that no one could know. My conversion wasn't spectacular. There were no lights, no voices, no witnesses. It was hidden, secret, silent. And somehow it was also real. There, in that dark setting, with the distant sound of footsteps and military orders, I knew that something inside me had changed forever. But internal change is something that shows through in behavior, even when you try to disguise it. And in my case, the effort to hide my transformation lasted less than I expected. My colleagues began to notice small things. I wasn't as aggressive anymore. I didn't ask questions with the same intimidating tone. I no longer showed the same enthusiasm for certain operations. Sometimes I would withdraw at unusual hours, inventing excuses to be alone. I tried to keep everything normal, but it was impossible to completely hide the fact that something in me had changed. It didn't take long for the rumors to start. First whispers, strange glances, subtle comments, then clearer signs, till one day I received a silent warning from someone I considered a kind of neutral colleague, someone who wasn't a friend, but also wasn't an enemy. "They're saying you're getting involved with Christian ideas, be careful. They're going to interrogate you." The word interrogate in that context wasn't just small talk. It was a veiled warning of what could happen if I was really being watched. At that moment I realized I had no more time. I couldn't prove I hadn't changed. I couldn't lie. I couldn't go on. I needed to escape my own world, the walls I myself helped to build, the orders I once obeyed with pride. This decision didn't come from heroism, it came from desperation. I abandoned my career, my reputation, my family, everything. I took nothing but what was necessary. I knew that if I stayed, I wouldn't just be punished, I would be erased. Crossing borders clandestinely wasn't easy. Every movement felt like a calculated risk, every sound a threat. I hid in trucks, mingled with travelers, slept in places where no one should sleep. Every step I took seemed to echo the question that haunted me. What am I doing? But there was something stronger guiding me, something I couldn't yet fully name. But that made me keep going. After many days, I managed to reach Europe. I spent months trying to find a way to move forward, always avoiding any official registration, always afraid of being found. Until, through contacts and lengthy processes, I managed to apply for entry into the United States as a political refugee. When I finally set foot on American soil, I felt like I was breathing for the first time in years, even knowing that my journey was far from over. And it was here that everything took another unexpected turn. When I learned that Charlie Kirk would be speaking at a conference in my state, something inside me urged me to go. I trembled as I walked to that auditorium. It was like encountering the source of everything that had transformed me. When I finally stood face to face with him, my voice failed me, and all I could say was, "You were the voice God used to break through my darkness." He listened to me with an attention I hadn't expected, placed his hand on my shoulder, and prayed with me right there, in the midst of dozens of people who had no idea what was happening. He encouraged me as if he knew me, as if he had been waiting for me. And he told me, "God hasn't finished your story." And that phrase has been echoing inside me ever since, opening doors in my heart that I didn't even know were locked. I started studying theology, participated in discipleship groups, shared small parts of my story with small groups, almost whispering because I still felt the weight of my past. But each time I spoke, I felt something aligning, as if, finally, I was where I should be. And so, step by step, my life began to move in a direction I could never have imagined, and the most intense part of this journey was yet to come, because everything that had happened up to that point was just the beginning. Just when I thought I had finally found some stability in the United States, when I imagined I could breathe without looking back every night, I received news that changed everything again. And this time, there was no escape. The first notification came through a volunteer lawyer who was assisting with my asylum process. He called me for an urgent meeting, and as soon as I saw his face, I knew something was deeply wrong. He didn't speak with his usual calm voice. He spoke slowly, as if measuring each word, trying to avoid hitting me too hard. And that's how I heard the phrase that for a moment made my world collapse again. "Your country's government has just issued an official statement accusing you of desertion and religious treason." I had expected some reaction from them. I had fled, leaving behind responsibilities, secrets, information. But religious betrayal was like a stone thrown straight into my soul. That accusation in my land wasn't just a political issue, it was a death sentence. It was the kind of word that destroyed entire families, that marked generations. It was a public sentence, a stain that would never be erased. And hearing that, after everything I had already lived through, made my chest tighten as if I couldn't breathe. My lawyer continued speaking, explaining that the government had officially requested my extradition, alleging that I had abandoned my duties and embraced ideologies considered hostile. The way he read those words sent a chill down my spine. Hostile. That's what they called my faith. What had previously been just internal doubts had now turned into a public war with my name in the middle. My past was knocking at the door again, demanding that I answer for decisions that, although new to me, meant a great deal to them. In the following days, the pressure increased. It was as if I were living inside a never-ending storm. Newspapers in my country began publishing articles calling me a deserter, a traitor, an infiltrator. Inflammatory comments appeared on social media, full of hatred, full of unfounded accusations. Some said I had been recruited by foreign groups, others that I was part of a spiritual conspiracy. Expressions that made me realize they didn't even know what they were talking about anymore, and yet each word directly affected my memory, my identity, and my newfound faith. And as expected, all of this began to affect my process of remaining in the United States. The American authorities, even cautiously, started asking for more documents, more interviews, more proof that I was truly at risk if I returned to my native country. But at that moment, as I looked at the cold paperwork, I knew it wasn't just a legal matter. It was a spiritual one. I found myself at a crossroads far greater than any concrete road. I needed to decide who I really was now. I needed to decide if my faith was real enough to be lived, or just kept as a secret. That's when I faced the question that changed the course of my life. Should I hide my faith to ensure my safety, or should I publicly embrace what has transformed my heart? I thought about it for several nights. I walked alone through the streets, sat on empty park benches, prayed silently, always asking God to show me the way. My fear wasn't of death, although it was there, lurking in every thought. What terrified me was disappointing the God who rescued me. How could I hide after all he had done for me? How could I erase that which finally gave me peace? It was on a cold morning that I made the decision. I woke up with a heavy heart, but a clear mind. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I couldn't pretend anymore. If God had pulled me out of the darkness, it wasn't so that I would spend the rest of my life in silence. I took a deep breath, called my lawyer, and said, "I want to give my testimony publicly." He was silent for a few seconds, perhaps trying to process the idea, perhaps trying to gauge the size of the storm it would cause, but I knew I needed to do it. I needed to tell the world who I had been and who I had become. He scheduled a press conference with some American journalists, explained my story, asked for secrecy until the right moment, and on that day, I sat before more cameras than I was prepared to face. My hands were trembling. My throat felt tight, as if there was a knot stuck there. But when the lights came on and the first journalist said, "We're live," something inside me calmed down, as if an invisible hand held my shoulders and reminded me that I wasn't alone. I told everything. I spoke about my past, about the operations, about the persecution of house churches, about the desperate escape. And for the first time, I spoke publicly about my faith. I said words I never imagined I would have uttered before the world. I found the truth of Jesus Christ in silence, hidden away, fearing even my own thoughts. But now I am no longer afraid to say who he is to me. The impact was immediate. Within hours, the video of the press conference circulated across all social media. People began to share, comment, cry, thank, and express outrage. Christian groups of various denominations mobilized. Human rights organizations contacted me, and religious leaders sent me messages of support. It was as if my story had broken through some invisible boundary and found fertile ground in thousands of hearts. My country's government tried to intensify the extradition request, claiming I was lying, that I was dangerous, that I needed to be taken back. But the more they tried to silence me, the more my story spread. The American government, pressured by journalists, by parliamentarians, by millions of people who saw the video, made a decision I will never forget. They officially rejected the extradition request. When I received the news, I fell to my knees, not out of relief, but out of gratitude. I knew that none of this had been built by my own strength. It was as if God was showing me that truth, when lived with courage, creates paths where only walls existed before. And it was there that the last part of this phase of my story began. A part I never would have imagined for myself. I spent months focused on learning, growing, and understanding more about the faith that transformed my life. I started receiving invitations from small churches, then from larger churches. And every time I stepped onto a pulpit or stood before a group of people, I felt something different, as if I were rediscovering my own voice. Not the voice of the soldier, not the voice of the persecutor, not the voice of the fugitive, but the voice of someone who had finally found their true purpose. Today, I speak to entire communities about persecuted Christians around the world. I share my story not out of pride, but out of responsibility, because if God could transform someone like me, someone who once believed he was right while destroying innocent people, then there is no one so far away that he cannot reach them. I always say this: God transformed a persecutor into a defender. And every time I pronounce those words, I remember the night I first heard Charlie Kirk, his voice saying that Saul was reached by Jesus on the road to Damascus. I remember the feeling of being called, pulled, awakened. I remember every moment that brought me here. Because however painful my story may be, however much it has been marked by darkness, it is also marked by grace. And I always end with the phrase I carry like a beacon in my heart. I found Jesus because a man spoke the truth without fear. Today I want to be that voice for others. After everything you've heard, I look back and realize that every part of my story, from the shadows I lived in to the light that reached me, points to the same truth. No one is too far from being transformed. The faith I found in secret, the God who rescued me when I least deserved it, and the courage I needed to embrace who I am today. All of this only reinforces that grace doesn't choose perfect people. It reaches the broken, the lost, those who think they have no way out. And if you've made it this far with me, know that your life too can be completely renewed by the love of Jesus, just as mine was. Check if you're already subscribed to the channel, because we still have many profound and transformative stories to share together. Also leave a like, and if you really watched this testimony to the end, comment below, "I love Jesus. I'll know you were with me until the very last second." And now, get ready. The next video is already appearing. He challenged Charlie Kirk and found the truth that took him out of the world of crime, a Christian testimony. You won't want to miss this.